Magandang umaga sa lahat, and maraming salamat to Rappler for giving UNICEF the chance to be here this morning. We know that it's a very tight agenda and it hasn't been easy, but we really appreciate to be given the chance to speak about why UNICEF considers climate change important to our work. And thank you very much to Ms. Rina as well for a very inspiring presentation, which actually connects a lot with what I'm going to talk about right now. So we've been hearing for the past few minutes why women are one of the most vulnerable sectors to climate change impacts in the Philippines. And I'm going to talk to another vulnerable sector, which is the one that UNICEF works with. This would be children. So why has UNICEF been engaged in the arena of climate change for the past months in the country? Because I don't need to remind anybody here that Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world. We're currently in number 5 in the Global Climate Risk Index. And there is plenty of evidence on the potential and actually the real impact that we're feeling nowadays of climate change in the Philippines. However, there is little of that evidence that reflects on the impact that climate change is having in children in the Philippines, and that considers the specific vulnerabilities that children, the boys and girls, are facing every day in climate change. So this internal reflection that connects with a lot of the international developments, the Conference of Paris Agreement, and so on, the Sustainable Development Goals, has prompted us in UNICEF to start reflecting about looking into the longer-term impacts of climate change in children. So we have been working in disaster risk reduction for many years already. We've been working in emergency preparedness and response, but we haven't really been addressing the longer-term impacts of climate change that are of a different nature. So that is what has prompted us to conduct what we call a climate landscape analysis for children, that I will be talking a little bit more later. But first of all, let me share quickly why do we believe that climate change impacts children in a different way that it impacts adults. So first of all, children are more exposed. They're a big size of the population here in the Philippines. We're talking about more than 40% of under 18 years old in the Philippines. So the numbers are big, and they're also living in some of the most exposed and vulnerable areas to climate change impacts. So this would be small, remote islands, urban poor communities that have a big number of child population, indigenous communities that are heavily reliant on natural resources, and so on. Children are more vulnerable physiologically to the impacts of climate change. So hazards such as droughts, heat waves, rising temperatures, they have a bigger impact on children, and they are less able to cope with them. Children are more prone to climate-related diseases. So this would be dengue, malaria, waterborne diseases. All of them are set to increase with the rising temperatures and with new weather patterns that are going to start affecting new areas, and they're going to have a big toll on children's health. Children are obviously more likely to get injured by the impacts of typhoons and other climate disasters. And finally, climate change undermines opportunities. So a simple example, just think about the number of days that a child, a girl or a boy, misses during her entire school life due to schools closings because of disasters and other extreme weather events, that through her or his entire school life, the difference and the inequity issue that poses towards other children who have not been so much affected, and that obviously are starting their jobs, lives in a different starting point. So after making this reflection, what we did in UNICEF Philippines that I've mentioned already is we conducted a climate landscape analysis for children. This is a tool that has been developed by our headquarters in New York, and we're the first country in Southeast Asia to have done this exercise. So basically what we did, this was our way to find out what was happening in the Philippines, what was the situation for children in regards to climate change, and if it makes sense for UNICEF to be part of this arena. because we already acknowledge that there are many agencies working in climate change. There are UN agencies and civil society organizations that are providing solutions, but we wanted to find out more about what UNICEF should be doing for this. So we basically, applying a child lens, we looked at climate, energy, and environment issues in the Philippines. So not only climate change, but also energy and environment, because we acknowledge that climate change is a multidimensional issue, and it requires integrated solutions. We reviewed the policies and the laws, the programs that the government has put in place in the Philippines, and trying to see if they have properly incorporated and acknowledged children's concerns. We looked at the climate funding situation, if donors are investing money and are taking into consideration children's vulnerabilities. And as I said already, we looked at internally to us, we looked at our comparative advantage, if, what can we bring to the table, and also what would be the cost of not doing anything? What would be the cost to the results that UNICEF and the government of the Philippines have been able to achieve in the past years? What would be the cost of neglecting and ignoring the impact that climate change will have in those results that have been achieved so far? So let's get to the flesh of it, and let me share with you some of the most striking and most relevant findings that we made during this process. So to begin with, we saw in the rounds of consultations and the rounds of meetings that we had that Philippines has a great enabling environment for climate change. We didn't have to spend any time convincing anybody about the urgency of the issue, about why is it important to work in climate change. We simply didn't have to do that because everybody knows that already, fortunately. But we saw that there is children and youth are not enough represented in the laws, in the policies, in the programs, and there has to be more presence of them. We saw that sea level rise in the Philippines exceeds the global average by 10%, and this could force to relocate up to 13.6 million people, a majority of them children. We saw that Philippines is the third largest contributor to plastics in the ocean. That seems to be a regional issue because the two other countries are China and Vietnam. So we're heavily polluting our oceans, in which many fishermen rely on. We saw, as I mentioned, that dengue and other vector and waterborne diseases are due to increase, and they will have a huge impact on children's health. And we were also struck to see that still nowadays, 50% of the Philippines population, especially in rural areas, are still relying on solid fuels for cooking, and that has a huge impact on children's health, on respiratory diseases like asthma, pneumonia, bronchitis, who are responsible of many child deaths every year. And to finish with, there's still nowadays more than 1,300 schools across the Philippines who have no access to electricity. Most of them are in Mindanao. So that means that still today more than 220,000 students are studying in schools that are not connected to the electrical grid. So to finish with, I just want to share some key recommendations that we believe are good entry points to start addressing the issues that I've been mentioning already. We believe that it's important to ensure that climate, environment, and energy are mainstreamed in all government policies and programs. And this doesn't mean only the most obvious ones, so that would be Department of Energy, DNR, and so on, but really across the whole spectrum of government programs, because we're talking really about a multidimensional issue that has to be addressed in a very complex manner. Of course, in UNICEF, we would advocate that policies and programs respond and incorporate children's and youth's concerns, as I've been stating before, and then they don't neglect those specific vulnerabilities, and that they also promote the participation of children and youth in those decision process, since they're such a big chunk of the population in the Philippines. We believe that it's key to consider and integrate better climate change mitigation and adaptation in the way we program and we deliver. So in UNICEF and the government of the Philippines are working in health, in water and sanitation, education, social policy, Those are all areas that are certainly going to be affected and are already being affected by climate change. So we really need to start thinking about how do we integrate climate change in the way we work. And finally, we should maximize the potential of youth and children as actors and champions against climate change. We need to capacitate children to be part of negotiations, to be actively participating to create solutions, and also provide them with green jobs to benefit from the opportunities that also come with climate change. So this would be all. I just want to share 4 reports that UNICEF has been publishing if you want to find out more about how climate change is impacting children. And I've also brought a few copies of our climate landscape analysis for children. I hope we can share it later. And that would be all. Thank you very much. If you want to know more about this issue, feel free to contact me at my email address. Thank you.